So we're making coconut flour flatbread. And we're starting with 1/2 cup of coconut flour. We have 1 teaspoon of baking powder. We have 1 tablespoon of psyllium husk powder. We have 1/4 teaspoon of xanthan gum. 1/2 teaspoon of sweetener, granulated of your choice. And 1/8 teaspoon of salt. Now in this container here, I have 1 tablespoon of nutritional yeast with 1 teaspoon each of onion and garlic powder. But first we're going to just sift the flours and all the ingredients to make sure they're all incorporated together. We want to have a light airiness to the flour that affects the final product. And then see those little clumps at the bottom. We want to make sure we get those out so they can also be incorporated smoothly into the dough. So after we do that, you see there's nothing left in the strainer and everything is in the bowl, which is what we want. So now I'm going to take the nutritional yeast and the onion and the garlic powder and do the same thing, just sift it. However, because the yeast, much of it are yeast flakes, you're going to see that it will not. I could grind it up into a powder in a spice grinder, but it's really not going to make that much of a difference. So I'm just going to add it in. It's really the flours and everything else you want incorporated through the strainer. So now we're going to mix everything all together, get everything incorporated. And here we have our hot water. It must be hot to activate the psyllium. And when you're using, this is about a cup. When you're using coconut flour, it's very, very absorbent. So you need double the amount of water to flour in order to get the right consistency. But in the beginning, I just kind of like test the dough, and you just put a little bit in there until it gets like a crumbly texture. And then slowly start adding more into it. Like I said, coconut flour is very absorbent. Sometimes it takes a little while for it to absorb everything. It may look like it's oversaturated, and then you wait a little bit, and then, it gets the right consistency. So the only way to know is to go really slowly and see how it starts to react. Sometimes you need more liquid and sometimes you don't, like I said, depending on the brand of coconut flour. Yeah, so here this looks pretty good. You see everything is sticking together. The psyllium is being activated. I'm probably going to add just a little bit more because you kind of want it more moist and not, because when it cooks it kind of dries out. But if you're new to this and you're not sure, I would just let the dough sit maybe for 30 seconds to a minute, just to make sure that it's absorbed sufficiently and it still is moist and it still is pliable. You see how it has that nice smooth texture? That's good. So I think we got what we were looking for here. Next we're gonna just start to divide the dough and start making our flatbreads. So what you need next is going to be parchment paper, 2 sheets that you're going to roll the dough in between. So as you can see, everything here is looking good. Everything is sticking together. Nothing is crumbled, and it also doesn't look too saturated. Perfect texture. That's what you want to go for. Okay. So now, after I divided my dough, I'm going to pull out the parchment paper and take some of the dough and make a bowl with it. It should feel smooth to the touch, not sticky and not dry and crumbly. So you flatten it out a little bit, you roll it out. You don't want to apply too much pressure. You want it to be thin, but you don't want it to be so thin that you can't lift it up off the parchment paper. So, and parchment paper is what I recommend. I've tried other forms of, like wax paper will not work. Nothing else will work. You need parchment paper for this. And here what I've gotten for the mold is simply just, and that's the kind of thickness you want. So here what I've gotten for the mold is simply just a lid from a protein powder container, which works perfectly for the size that I want. So just cut it out, make the mold. The dough should peel away from the mold very easily. Now I've been having the pan heat, a well-oiled pan heat. So I'm now just turning up the heat so it can be at the right temperature. And you want to make sure it is sprayed, otherwise it'll probably stick or burn too quickly. So make it another ball while the heat is rising in the pan. Rolling it out again to about an eighth of an inch. Now you can also with this make flatbread pizza. And then when I do that, I use a lid that you'll see that I covered this flatbread with. I use that because it's a larger mold and works really well for a nice sized personal pizza. So, but this is just for your average flatbread that would accompany a meal, or you can, use it for a sandwich, or a little taco, And sometimes one side comes out a little thicker if that happens, and you have to be particular about it. You can just flatten it out to keep it more uniform. So here we are with our well-oiled and heated pan. We'll put our first flatbread into it. And it's me probably pouring out a yeast flake or something. And you cover it. And you leave it for about a minute or so. Now, when it's ready, you'll know because it should very, very easily lift off of the pan. Now, if you try to lift it off with a spatula and it gives any type of resistance, let it sit for a little longer. The way you know it's truly ready, as you'll see right now, is that it will easily lift and even kind of slide across when you try to lift it like that. Then you turn it over, that's perfect. And you see how it rises. So even if you do it really thin, you feel like, oh, this is too thin, it will rise in the pan because you have the leavening in there. So you let that sit for another minute on the other side. Again, it should be easily able to be lifted. And there you have your first coconut flour flatbread. Spray. You want this on medium-low heat. You don't want it too high because it'll burn too fast. And if you don't want it too low, because then it'll just take too long. So medium heat is good. And, about 1 or 2 minutes on each side, and there you go. So now here's a cool trick that I learned and what I usually do afterwards is because, like I said, coconut flour can be kind of dry. I'll put like some kind of butter or oil, if you have a flavored oil, like a garlic or whatever. That really makes it good. But here's a trick to make it kind of like fire roasted. So you take it, and if you don't have a gas oven, that's not going to work, but maybe about 30 seconds on either side will give it that nice char to it. And there we go. Fire roasted coconut flour flatbread. Enjoy.